Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today at IDC's second monthly Learn at Lunch session. Learn at Lunch is an opportunity to get together, of course, to have lunch, but also to hear from a variety of speakers on a variety of very important topics and interesting topics, certainly that affect Christians in the Middle East. This particular installment of the Learn at Lunch, we're going to learn about Christians in the South Caucasus, specifically Armenian Christians in Artsakh, also known as Nagorno-Karabakh. Today we're excited to hear from Mr. Robert Avetisyan, permanent representative of the Republic of Artsakh to the United States. It'll no doubt be an interesting talk. We'll hear from Representative Avetisyan, who will outline the current events affecting Artsakh, putting it all into historical context, and also distill it down into what this means for Christians in Artsakh and the greater region as a whole. We'll also have the opportunity to enjoy lunch today, those who are here in person. So first, I'd like to invite our friend from the Armenian National Council Committee of America, Elizabeth Chuljan. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you to IDC for always being such an incredible partner to ensuring that Christians around the world are safeguarded, certainly working with the Armenian community to ensure that the Armenian genocide is properly recognized here in the United States through legislation in 2019, and then, of course, through President Biden's appropriate commemoration in 2021, and then, of course, building on that to the crisis that we see in Artsakh right now. IDC always at the forefront of speaking out for the communities that have been imperiled. We're talking today over 135 days into Azerbaijan's blockade of Artsakh. That means 135 days of the people of Artsakh, the Armenian indigenous community there, not being able to come and go as they please, not having access to food, not having access to health care, oftentimes in peril of their lives throughout this period. And at the same time, we see 135 days during which, in addition to the blockade, Azerbaijan has been continuing to attack both Armenia proper and the Republic of Artsakh. And so in this time period, it's more important than ever to have this issue front and center, to have Mr. Avetisyan come in front and center and speak about the very real dangers of ethnic cleansing and genocide happening right now. It's very important, in fact, and timely, because Monday, April 24th, was the International Day of commemoration of the Armenian genocide. And right now, our number one focus is not only securing justice for the crimes that have been committed in the past, but ensuring that genocide yet again is not committed in Artsakh. And here the United States can play an incredibly pivotal role, first and foremost by stopping to aid and abet Azerbaijan during this crisis by cutting all military aid to Azerbaijan, and of course sending immediate humanitarian assistance to Artsakh. And so we're pleased to be co-hosting this event with Mr. Avetisyan, and it's a fantastic opportunity for us to learn more and immediately take action to support legislation in the books right now to enforce cutting all military aid to Azerbaijan and getting the help to Artsakh that's needed. Thanks so much.
Thank you, and my name is William Roberts. I'm a Government Relations Associate with In Defense of Christians. We chose to hold our April seminar on the subject in recognition of the Armenian genocide and the contemporary iteration witnessed today in Artsakh. In the last days of the Ottoman Empire, tragedy was unleashed upon the Armenians, Greeks, Syriacs, including Assyrians, Chaldeans, and Maronites, to displace these indigenous populations and erase their historical connections to their lands. While these people had previously been subjected to pogroms and discrimination for their Christian faith, they were the first to experience systemic deportation and execution of their entire people in the 20th century. The genocide failed to erase the Armenian, Greek, and Syriac peoples from history, although its legacy looms heavily over the surviving generations. The continuous denial of these atrocities has ramifications for survivors today. Throughout the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war, leaders of Azerbaijan compared the conflict to completing the work of the Armenian genocide, further justifying the war crimes committed against Armenians by the Azeri military. During the most recent invasion of Armenia by Azerbaijan in 2020, this narrative was once again used to defend the war crimes committed by the aggressor. A few months after this horrible attack, supposed environmental activists blockaded the only road between Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia at the clear direction of the Aliyev regime. Shortly thereafter, energy, food, and other essential supplies were stopped from entering Artsakh, cutting off the 120,000 residents from the outside world. For over 135 days, the Lakan corridor has remained closed without a substantial response from the international community or the United States. It is critical that we recognize the role of the United States in providing military assistance to Azerbaijan and our inaction in responding to Azerbaijan's aggression against Armenia and Artsakh. The U.S. must revoke the waiver for Section 907 to suspend all military assistance to Azerbaijan and our support for the ethnic cleansing of Armenians from Artsakh. Furthermore, the U.S. must take a clear position on the status of Nagorno-Karabakh and support the people of Artsakh in their quest for self-determination and freedom from the genocidal regime that rules over them. Speaking on behalf of Artsakh's struggle for self-determination and the basic conditions for life, with us today is Robert Avetisyan, serving as the permanent representative for the Republic of Artsakh since 2009. Representative Avetisyan previously served in the Foreign Ministry of Artsakh and served as a counselor to the Republic of Artsakh's office in Washington, D.C. He has been a tireless advocate for the people of Artsakh here in D.C. Representative Avetisyan attended this year's State of the Union address as the guest of Senator Schiff to call to attention the blockade of the Lakan corridor. Representative Avetisyan is the strongest voice for Artsakh here in Washington, D.C., so please welcome him to the podium.
With this. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you, Richard, William, and the IDC family for arranging this discussion. This is a very timely and important opportunity for us as we try to raise awareness about Artsakh in general, as well as the situation that is happening. Also, my thanks to Elizabeth and my brothers and sisters at the ANCA for their steadfast support throughout this difficult period. I want to thank also for a very interesting for this opportunity and for this very interesting title that Uncoding the Artsakh issue. Indeed, for non-Armenians and also for many Armenians, not everything is clear about Artsakh. Not everyone knows what is Artsakh, where it comes from. Not everyone realizes its connection with the Armenian genocide. Not everyone knows that this is one of the consequences of the long-standing anti-Armenian policy by Turkey and Azerbaijan in the South Caucasus. So I welcome very much this opportunity. And we decided to talk, but also present the Artsakh and what it stands for and its history and its legal and political aspects of its sovereignty through a brief presentation, after which I hope that I will be able to answer any questions that the audience might have. Very basic facts. Artsakh, according to our constitution, its territory is almost 4,500 square miles. The population 150,000 people, and this number has changed after the 2020 aggression, and tens of thousands are now forced to leave Artsakh and live outside until the state of Artsakh and our government has the opportunity to recuperate and create the proper conditions in terms of social infrastructure, residential, and all the relevant infrastructure for them to be able to come back. Religion is Armenian Apostolic Christian. Capital city Stepanakert, a beautiful, very welcoming and very safe town. Neighbors Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Iran. The problem of Nagorno-Karabakh started in 1918 when the Russian Empire disintegrated and Azerbaijan for the first time appeared on the political map. By doing so, Azerbaijan right away put territorial claims towards Armenia, Georgia, and other neighboring states. The League of Nations, though, which was the antecedent of the United Nations, did not recognize neither Azerbaijan nor its claims on Artsakh or other historically Armenian territories. The situation of no war, no peace, and unclarity of the demarcation and administrative division of the region lasted until the Sovietization of the South Caucasus, and when the Soviet Union established here or expanded its power on our region, the Soviet authorities decided to incorporate Nagorno-Karabakh into newly created Soviet Azerbaijani Republic, but following the resistance and opposition from the indigenous local Armenian population, it was agreed that it will be as an Armenian autonomy. So the fact of the autonomy already implies that we did not organically belong to that. We were all part of the Soviet Union, and independent Azerbaijan never had Artsakh as its part. But there were freedom aspirations even throughout the Soviet history. And it was clear for us that Azerbaijan, the Soviet authorities were using everything they could to change the demographic situation in the region. And for instance, the 3% of non-Armenian population, or 97% of were Armenians by the early 20th century. But according to the last census in the Soviet Union, which was in 1989, already 79% were Armenians, and the non-Armenian, mostly Azeri population in Artsakh increased sevenfold, and it was done artificially. Armenians were invited or even forced to move out from Nagorno-Karabakh. They were offered jobs or employment or academic opportunities outside of Nagorno-Karabakh to make sure that there are fewer Armenians and more Azerbaijanis. And also it was accompanied by economic problems and lack of any attention from the authorities in Azerbaijan, and we also felt a lot of problems and biased attitude towards the Armenian autonomy here. We went through economic and demographic situation, all those problems, and also it's very important to know that the Artsakh problem, the sovereignty problem, or pretty much the cause to remain Armenian, which at that time was in the form of reuniting with Armenia, it did not stop even during the Soviet years. It had its moments during the Soviet era, especially after the Second World War, then in the 60s and in the 70s, but all those attempts were suppressed, and people were severely punished for demanding rights or democracy or whatever we wanted, and whatever was the opportunity for us to remain Armenian. But the situation changed with the era of perestroika and glasnost. When Gorbachev came to power in mid-80s, he said that the new political line was that people were allowed from then on to speak about subjects and issues that were previously tabooed. And of course, for us in Artsakh, it was another opportunity to raise our voice for our rights, for democratic aspirations, and for our vision on how Artsakh can remain Armenian, which was the reunification with Armenia. That process shaped up as a legislative and legal process in 1988, when Nagorno-Karabakh's autonomy and our top legislative authority, which did have that authority and legitimacy, they appealed before the Armenian authorities, before the Azerbaijani authorities, Soviet Armenian Azerbaijani, and the Soviet Center in Moscow, to transfer the Nagorno-Karabakh autonomy under administration of Armenia, and for the Moscow to validate the deal. It never happened. In return, we have seen the first major anti-Armenian pogroms in Baku, in Azerbaijan, hundreds of miles away from Karabakh proper, which already was a signal for us that this is not going to be a civilized dialogue, that we need to self-organize and make sure that the aggressive anti-Armenian sentiments do not lead to a bigger catastrophe. But hundreds of people were killed just for being Armenians. And then, without any tangible signal from the central communist authorities at the time, Azerbaijan went further, and anti-Armenian pogroms expanding pretty much all the entire territory of Azerbaijan. Refugees began to appear on both sides, and eventually the lack of any response, be it international or local, led to a full-scale aggression against Artsakh. The Soviet Union began to crumble already by the 1989, and actually many perceived the Karabakh problem to be the first one, the really democratic movement, which sparked similar processes across the Soviet area. And Soviet republics, including Armenia and Azerbaijan, began to seek independence by the late 90s. And in the 1991, They declare independence in line with the enacting legislation, which opened for us a legal opportunity to proclaim independence for the Nagorno-Karabakh itself. So if there is a question why the self-determination movement kind of replaced the reunification movement, the movement of reunification with Armenia, that was solely this. We wanted to act in full compliance with enacting legislation and to be able to stand before any audience decades later and say that our legal, historical, and especially after so many incidents of aggression against us, also the moral stance and moral preconditions for our statehood are absolutely strong and legitimate. So in December 10, in line with the enacting legislation, in accordance with the Constitution of the USSR, Nagorno-Karabakh's autonomy conducts a referendum, national referendum, which is the strongest expression of public will and the most democratic one, and we proclaimed independence of the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic. Legitimate process, it was absolutely legitimate, and as I said, has a very strong historic and moral components. Azerbaijan's response was pretty much predictable. It was a full-scale aggression against us. We were surrounded, and it was an effort we did not have land connection with the Republic of Armenia then, and it was attempted to kill us, and by doing so, just to close the issue by killing everything and anything Armenian in Artsakh. But there was a strong international reaction from the OAC Minsk group. OAC stands for Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And the Minsk process was formed with 3 permanent co-chairs, United States, Russia, and France, in order to try bring parties closer and negotiate a tangible peace. The war lasted for 3 years. It ended in 1994 with signing of a ceasefire agreement between Artsakh, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, and it opened doors to a relative stability. There was never peace in this region, unfortunately, and our republic has always been facing existential threat and constant attempts to violate our borders or not let the normal life be happening along the contact line or border with Azerbaijan. But at least the 94 agreement put an end to active military hostilities and allowed the 2 countries, Azerbaijan and Artsakh, to develop in their own vision of political development, economic development, etc. Then, of course, we have another tragic period of our history, which is still happening so far, the war of 2020. Azerbaijan, this time with open participation of Turkey and open participation of terrorist groups from Middle East, attacked Artsakh, and the aggression was absolutely brutal. Yes, there was an international reaction, but we know that it was not enough to stop the aggression against Artsakh. It lasted for 44 days. We again lost thousands of lives. It was a very tragic development for the Armenian nation, and especially for us in Artsakh and us in Armenia. The ceasefire was eventually signed on November 9, which kind of stopped the active hostilities, but at the same time opened opportunities for continuation of the peace process. So we know that this is a statement, and statement is not the heaviest diplomatic document, so there is much more space to work and to discuss and to finalize all the remaining controversial or sensitive issues for the concerned stakeholders. The war was brutal. There was indiscriminate fire on the pretty much entire Artsakh's infrastructure. We had civilian losses, unfortunately. The Artsakh army resisted to the extent possible, and it is indeed a manifestation of extreme bravery that we resisted. It was not just those 2 countries and that terrorist component. There were much more countries involved in this, and on our end, we could, whatever was possible, to save Artsakh from a complete de-Armenization and complete second kind of stage of the Armenian genocide. The map in the lower right corner is the factual map of what the situation is as of now. The orange part is the one that remains under administration of the Republic of Artsakh, with effective authority of the Republic of Artsakh. But I have to say that despite this aggression and despite the devastating effect of it, Artsakh has survived as a state. Artsakh has survived as a society, as a democracy, and we are now catching up and try to do whatever we can to recuperate also as an economy. Of course, it's not easy after the war, and especially in the conditions of the ongoing blockade. At the same time, this blockade is teaching us how to mobilize all the existing resources, how to optimize whatever we have, and if it comes to the resolution of Artsakh's any Artsakhi to remain on his homeland and fight with whatever abilities they have, it is always there. So we hope that with the continued international pressure, Azerbaijan will restore the unimpeded access connection between Artsakh and Armenia, just like it has been reflected in the document signed by Azeri president, and they're in violation of that document as of now. But we have seen a strong international response, including from here, from the United States, from Congress, from the executive branch. There was a verdict by the International Court of Justice, which demands also restoration of the unimpeded access between Artsakh and Armenia. And we hope that this pressure will eventually allow us collectively as Armenians in Artsakh, in Armenia, and the diaspora, as also partner organizations and the entire humanitarian pretty much community and the civilized community of nations to end the blockade and make repetition of such atrocities or such aggressive facts and actions against Artsakh in the future impossible. But Artsakh is much more than a war and much more than a tough history. Since 1994, as soon as we have a chance, we develop as a democracy, as an open society, as a functioning economy. All rounds of elections, I mean, that was the vision of Artsakh, and that still remains the vision of Artsakh. Artsakh's cause was for our rights to remain Armenian, to remain Christian, to learn our language, to pray to our God, to be able to live under government of own choosing, and to be able to live in the rights that we feel are fundamental for any human being, wherever he or she lives. And that choice remains unshakable and remains there. Artsakh continued whenever we had a chance to develop and strengthen its democratic institutions. All our elections were free and transparent, which was also the verdict or the assessment of hundreds of international observers who were present at every round of elections. Economic development was also there. Artsakh very quickly turned into a country which has been exporting clean energy. Agriculture is very big in Artsakh. So the vision is there. If given a chance, the Republic of Artsakh will be a more democratic, more economically prosperous, and more reliable partner for the international community, especially, which is very important, especially in this volatile region of South Caucasus. We are a component of a regional security configuration, and it is also one of the kind of reasons why the big players, the major international political, economic, and military players are involved in the situation, and all of them, everyone shares with us the agenda that the South Caucasus and the Artsakh Republic should be part of a peaceful, prosperous, predictable, and democratic South Caucasus. That agenda we share, and we are doing whatever we can on our fight, on our part of this fight. International recognition is a priority for us. We strongly believe that Artsakh's rights and freedoms, just like rights and freedoms of any person, of any nationality, any denomination, they do not have to be protected solely on the battlefield, and our right to live in freedom doesn't have to depend on our ability to defend it on the battlefield. This is the 21st century. We are well over the medieval cruelty and medieval way of doing stuff, and we expect that the international recognition of Artsakh will happen as soon as possible, and which it will provide us with the opportunities to use also the political, international, including political toolset for advancing our interests, for protecting our rights, and promoting to that shared and general vision of a peaceful and prosperous South Caucasus and the wider region. Thank you. This is it, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Questions from the audience?
people are going through what they're going through, and they want to speak not only to their aggressor, but also to the U.S. How is that communicated?
You mean people from Artsakh all the way to the supply chain, so to say? Well, we have one major blessing that very few nations have, and that's the Armenian diaspora. And the another blessing is that the Armenian diaspora is absolutely connected with the general Armenian agenda, and Artsakh now is very high on that agenda, right? And even there is no any for the diaspora, which is, we can say, it is a product of a genocide, right? The diaspora formed as a result of the genocide in Turkey in 1915, which started in 1915, but we strongly believe that it did not end; it is still ongoing, right? So diaspora begins to not disconnect, or begins to see the similarities of these two problems, and how Armenia, safe Armenia, with safe borders, with democratic government, with all the choices that we may have as a nation, and democratic and safe and sound and economically prosperous Artsakh. That fight is part of the fight against the Armenian genocide. And the issue to de-Armenize Artsakh, like what has been done with Nakhichevan and other Armenian areas, also in the Western Armenians, and the general anti-Armenian policy is absolutely the policy of the continuation of the Armenian genocide. We know that the same forces were involved in 1918, the massacres which started in the early 20th century across Armenia, Artsakh, and all the way to Baku, which was heavily populated by Armenians in the early 20th century, right? So that picture is clear for our diaspora, and it is becoming more and more clear that one of the most effective ways to resist and fight against the Armenian genocide is also by strengthening Artsakh and Armenia, and to make sure that the genocidal intentions don't work like they worked with the rest of ancient Armenian lands. And we are very grateful, like I said, to the ANCA and other organizations and individuals who join this fight, who work on the US Congress, who inform the executive officials, and also involve partner organizations like the IDC, which are very much, we appreciate that, and other organizations who join this board, because we have to understand collectively that this is not an Armenian issue solely, and whoever is against aggression, against fascism, against intolerance in any form or manifestation, if we say so, they have to be on board in this fight. This is a civilizational fight. We fight against a pattern of a genocidal action which from Armenians in the South Caucasus will be transcended to other regions and other nationalities if let happen, if let flourish, if let go unpunished. So we feel that, and we are very thankful that our compatriots here in the US and elsewhere, in many countries, pretty much around the world, they treat Artsakh in many cases as their own land. And it's rightfully so, because it is your home and it's part of your homeland.
You spoke just now about the close connection between the struggle for Artsakh, the recognition, and the ongoing denial of the Armenian genocide across the international community. And then, given that there are several states that have, in recent years, recognized the Armenian genocide, despite that, would you still say that international recognition of the Armenian genocide is a stepping stone, if you will, or a necessary step before Artsakh recognition can take place on a broader level?
Absolutely. As I said, we consider those two questions very much intertwined. And with every country recognizing the Armenian genocide and condemning it, it will be much more understandable for them to hear the fears, if you wish, of regular Artsakhis, or the concerns of Armenians in Artsakh and in Armenia against the same genocidal threat, especially if it's part of the picture. The genocide and recognition of genocide, nobody can say no to that. I mean, yes, we appreciate that all the governments are doing so. We're very happy that eventually the United States is in that list, which has formally, on all levels, has recognized the Armenian genocide. And again, thanks to very strong activities and activism by our compatriots here, but also the partner organizations, it was a common fight which can lead to a very tangible result. It is absolutely important for that process to come to the tipping point and to come to the point when Turkey and Azerbaijan and all other nations, especially tyrannies, which still think that genocidal toolset is a permissible thing, they need to get that clear signal from the world that no, this is not permissible. It doesn't have expiration time. It doesn't have any justification of whatever it is. And it's a very, very important thing. And we think that with recognition of the Armenian genocide, if we can explain that condemnation of the Armenian genocide, and one of the most important parts of it, which is the prevention of another genocide, is now by strengthening Artsak's freedom, sovereignty, and independence, that's already part of our job. And again, following your question, we hope that our organizations will continue steadfast, and partners like the IDC and everyone will continue to hit the same nail, as we say in Armenia and in Artsakh, and we'll eventually get there.
So from this side of things, DC policy circles, advocacy circles, and even casual spectators of what's happening currently in Artsakh, we tend to focus more or follow more the day-to-day occurrences and how U.S. policy or lack thereof could play a role, whether it's delivery of humanitarian aid or the suspension of military aid to Azerbaijan. But beyond that, and opening the scope a little bit more than simply that, clearly since 2020, the war of 2020, till today, 3 years now, there have been countless war crimes, violations of the rule of law and law of armed conflict. Proportionality is one. Respect for human dignity is another. Necessity, the principle of necessity is another. Clearly, they've been violated daily almost. Has there been anything done at the international level or attention to this fact or conversations? So we're dealing with one thing here in the States, right? Advocating for humanitarian aid and ceasing military aid. But broader than that, what's being done in terms of all of the plethora of war violations that have been committed?
Thank you. I would like to also reflect briefly on in general, the picture of U.S.-Artsakh relations, because they do exist. I know that many folks are surprised how can Artsakh be not recognized, have relations with the U.S., but exactly because U.S. as the strongest democracy and people and a nation which has very strong institutions here and strong organizations here, it is much easier for us to maintain that dialogue, and that dialogue has been happening. U.S. was one of the first countries and governments, actually, which has supported Artsakh's freedom aspirations in 1989. We will never forget that. The U.S. is the only country which has been rendering humanitarian assistance for Artsakh since 1998. Can we forget that? No, of course. And all those signals are much more than just the humanitarian aid, and you cannot really assess it in dollar value or in the whatever it was, right? The political signal that the U.S. is keeping an eye on this fledgling democracy, that some of our efforts are appreciated and that they don't go unnoticed, is very important for any country which is striving for international recognition and freedom and security and normal life, right? So the cutting aid to Azerbaijan would be, of course, another strong signal. And we also are very much hopeful that eventually there will be any U.S. assistance which will be able to be used for any activity to derail or to threaten or to increase genocidal threats against Armenia. Unfortunately, so far we don't see that. That's why the fight continues. The same fight and the same struggle in terms of assistance, in terms of sanctions against Azerbaijan or the regime separately, if not possible, to do that for the entire country, and also for the condemnation of the brutal war crimes and all sorts of violations of humanitarian law during the war, actually during the first war and during the second war. This is not the first time we're seeing this, but in this era it was easier to deliver the factual state of affairs through the media and new opportunities that happened. Yes, there are many processes happening, and of course we understand that one of the important processes is international legal process. So there are several cases which pretty much precisely deal with this issue, and the important stuff here is that activity here in the US or in France or in UK or elsewhere in South America or elsewhere or in the Middle East or in Australia. And the legal processes, they are also very much interconnected, because if we didn't have the US, for instance, reconnaissance information that international terrorism has been involved in that war, our claims would be less legitimate. But those facts are strengthened and legitimized by evidences from major countries which have significant intelligence services and the capacities. So all those things, they complement also the legal effort which has been happening. But legal is a very long process, and there is always opportunity to appeal it, and we already predictably know that it will be appealed. I think the major victory so far is the verdict by the ICJ, which kind of shows that even if Azeris lift the blockade, even if Aliyev orders to lift the blockade, it already shows the extent of the hatred towards ordinary people, towards kids who didn't have baby formula, towards people with acute medical needs that died in the hospital because they did not get the proper treatment outside the republic, etc. And so many horrific incidents of anti-Armenian actions. We already have that as one of the manifestations. So this kind of a package, which is not a good package, but it is necessary to get those signals from major capitals who will not raise any sort of legitimacy or, I don't know, doubts, and use them and capitalize on them in the international thing. So International Court of Justice, the verdict is very strong. Azerbaijan is trying to appeal it, of course, but it already is a big step which will, in the long run, and already does, but in the long run more so, it will strengthen our cause for international perception of the legitimacy of our independence. I hope I don't sound too complicated, but we need people to understand why we ask sovereignty, because if not given the sovereignty and the international political system to protect our borders, it will be a genocide. It will be another round of, again, you can, yes, in this case it's Armenian, but it can just take 120,000 people per se. It will be attempts to suffocate, attempts to freeze to death, or attempt to kill without the proper medical attention. Those are the choices which are pretty much, there is no choice. It means that there is no choice, and the struggle continues. Thank you. Yeah.
Building on your last response, there's a lot of talk in Washington, D.C. about finding confidence-building measures that would allow for ensuring the safety and security of Artsakh Armenians within Azerbaijani borders and whatnot, and trying to create this type of a scenario. What is your response to folks who, make those arguments, and quite often, sadly, from the State Department and other places? And then, secondly, earlier this week, there was a change in the methodology of this blockade. It appears that the Azerbaijanis have added a checkpoint along the Lanchin corridor that's going to be even more detrimental, if that could be even more. I mean, we've been blockaded for over 135 days, but it's even worse than it could be before. If you can give us a sense of what the next steps are there.
Thank you. The confidence building measures, absolutely, we agree on confidence building measures, and we were the party who has been suggesting confidence building measures 22 years ago. In 2001, that was when the first Artsakh government has formally appealed to the international mediators to establish that sort of cooperation with the neighboring Azerbaijan, because we know that eventually people will have to coexist as part of a bigger region of the South Caucasus. We need to learn how to put hatred aside, and we need to learn how we as people, on the people-to-people level also, invest in peace and stability and complement to international political mediation, international mediation efforts. Right? At the same time, all our attempts were either manipulated with by Azerbaijan or used for instigating further anti-Armenian sentiments. I remember delegations from Azerbaijan who visited Baku, Shushi, and across the republic, but upon returning, they were forced to say what they had to say. And when one person was courageous enough to see exact and precisely what he had seen in Stepanakert. He was attacked by tax services. He was labeled as a traitor, etc., etc. We have that, but we need to be careful and to make sure that any confidence building does not fall into manipulative effort by Azerbaijan to instigate further gap between our peoples. At the same time, even now, in these conditions, after the war, no matter how difficult it is, but we know that we have to talk, and we are suggesting talking to Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, in return, we get ultimatums, we get demands, we get threats that the blockade will continue, more to come, you have to accept our conditions, or, you know, pretty much this was the words by Azeri president a couple of weeks ago, and he said that for Armenia to be able to live in its borders as a safe country, there is one condition: you have to accept all our conditions. This is not a dialogue that can invest in confidence between the peoples, right? And in terms of Artsakh, Aliyev said, Artsakh, the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh have two choices: either to accept citizenship or to leave. What is this if not the threat of ethnic cleansing? What is this if not another threat of Armenian genocide, of a genocide in general, in this case against Armenians? It's absolutely clear for us that it is. And that level of hatred which has been poured into the Azerbaijani society by the repressive regime in Baku for decades, it takes a lot of effort and commitment by Azeri authorities themselves to change, without which, unfortunately, all our attempts to build bridges between the Armenian people and Azerbaijani people, they fall because, as Armenians say, one hand doesn't clap. We don't have the reciprocity. We don't have political system in Azerbaijan which will allow somebody to be not hostile to Armenians. They're being punished, they're being prosecuted, they're being called out, and unfortunately even the civil society and the journalists, which are called to be the more open-minded and more receptive and less radical, and unfortunately this anti-Armenian hatred has penetrated all levels of Azerbaijani society. Yes, at the same time, yes, we want confidence between our peoples, and we know that any tangible peace will require confidence between the peoples. Administration of Azerbaijan, I think I kind of covered it. If given a chance, Azerbaijan will do, doubtlessly, and we don't have any doubt that they will do what they have been very vocal about. De-Armenize Artsakh, drive everyone out, and force us to leave our millennial-old homes and leave our cemeteries and our churches, and just, that's it. That will be the done deal. And if anyone is interested in hearing precisely what is the plan, just analyze a couple of weeks of statements by Azeri president, and we will hear what he has been saying. You have to go, or you have to admit, or you have to stop being Armenian. I mean, Azerbaijan was given a chance during the Soviet Union to deal with Nagorno-Karabakh's autonomy. We saw what it led to. We saw the economic problems, we saw the demographic problems, we saw the discrimination on all levels. Then Azerbaijan was given a chance to deal with this issue in a civilized manner twice at least, in 91 and in 2020, and they chose war. We know what is the choice of weapon, so to say, of Azerbaijan against us. That's aggression, de-Armenization, and loss of Artsakh for us. The checkpoint is another violation of the November 9 statement, co-signed by Azerbaijani president. It's one of the things that is called to further toughen the situation in Artsakh on all levels. Again, 120,000 people, 30,000 kids, and many thousands of people with various disabilities and elderly. It is a significant psychological attack on Artsakh, and to finalize what they could not do with this so-called environmental protest near Shoshi, because Artsakh did not yield to all those attempts to suffocate, to freeze us during the winter. It was happening during the winter. We have to have that in mind. This is the next step. This is a political and psychological pressure on us. If let happen, it will lead to an absolutely derailing of the November 9 document, because this is against that document. This violates the one of the fundamental points, which is number 6, which is unimpeded access and movement of all sorts of people and all sorts of goods and services between Artsakh and Armenia. We see another violation and another evidence that Azerbaijan cannot be trusted just by words or by actions, and the international mechanism that has to be effective enough to enforce implementation of assumed commitments has to be present in this situation. That's why confidence building. One-on-one, we get ultimatums. Azerbaijan, without international mechanism to enforce the agreement, they do what they feel appropriate at that stage. But again, at least nothing new for us, but the new manifestation of how unreliable Azeri regime can be in negotiations.
So other than prayer, and I know the church, has prayers every night. What is happening at the blockade, and what do you think should be happening, and what are steps to go to that?
We've been saying that just kind of this reflects and continues on the previous question. Whatever was the tactics and strategy of working with Azerbaijan so far didn't work well. It leads to derailment, it leads to violation of assumed commitments, it leads to further suffering, it leads to an open genocidal threat, and if not punished, they will ask for more and they will do more. That's clear for us. So our task is to present this as is with all the potential, because from US, the view might be that how situation can be, how bad it can be that two parties cannot agree, but it is that bad. We don't have a party on the negotiations which is willing to negotiate without preconditions, without ultimatums, and which shares with us a general vision of the solution. And that is a very important component of any negotiations. If you have a general vision, if you have a general interest, then you can negotiate the details. The vision of Azerbaijan is Artsakh without Armenians. The vision of the rest of the world of Artsakh, Armenia, diaspora, United States, all major democracies, is safe and secure and predictable life of the people of Artsakh. How to get there might be different. It is clear for us that it requires international mechanism, it requires sovereignty for Artsakh, it requires a general comprehensive approach which will be strong enough to enforce that agenda. If no, it should be sanctions. It's a normal state of affairs with any country. If they don't comply with international commitment, if they violate the verdict by the ICJ, ICJ is a major legal body of the United Nations. It is on behalf of the entire international community, and they violate it, and they should be getting along with it. You will see many more autocratic governments doing the same within a decade, if you let this happen. We have been a case study, if you wish, on how a failure of international legal and political system can lead to more tragedies and more situations, just like what happened to the Armenian genocide when Hitler was planning the Holocaust. When he said, who cares, who now speaks about Armenians? If nobody speaks about Artsakh today, tomorrow we're going to have dozens and dozens of more cases of vulnerable population being subject to open atrocities by a repressive autocracy. How to deliver that message? It's a daily job. It is our job, also our task, to explain why sovereign Artsakh is also in the interest of the United States in the region. Why stronger Armenia, without any forceful change of borders by Azerbaijan and Turkey is for the good of the rest of the world. Yes, it is our task. That task is being is ongoing. It's a long-term commitment. Unfortunately, in the view that we need actions right now, the strategy is being revised, and we're doing whatever we can, again, with the help of all our supporters here, Armenian, non-Armenian, to explain it, to explain how this situation is threatening a much bigger picture than the issue of 120 Armenians in Artsakh. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Avetisyan, for that interesting talk. I thought it was particularly helpful because it provided a very beneficial context starting in 1918 to present day as to how we got to where we are today in Artsakh. So IDC, of course, will continue to stand by Artsakh and our brother and sister Armenian Christians suffering in the South Caucasus. I'd like to take this moment to announce IDC's next Learn at Lunch session, which will take place on May the 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. The talk will feature Dr. Robert Rabil, author and professor of political science and Middle Eastern studies at Florida Atlantic University. He'll be discussing the crisis in Lebanon and its effect on Christians in Lebanon and, of course, in the greater region. That'll be a webinar event, so be sure to register for that event soon. Information and registration will open up tomorrow. So once again, thank you all for joining us today, both here on location as well as those of you who joined us online. For those of us who are here in person, please help yourselves to lunch at the rear of the room. Thank you all.
Thank you.